So hey there fellow YouTubers, it's Frank Bush here again. So I just thought I'd do a quick video to show Apocolypse cheese. Now this is a cheese you can produce off pantry items. So I'll shift camera angles here, I'll walk through the handful of ingredients you're going to need to do this process. But in essence it allows you to pull stuff off your pantry, shelf that's been sitting there for 10, 15, 20 years, that kind of thing, and be able to make some fresh cheese out of it. So if you're interested in that kind of content, stay tuned. Okay, so I'm just going to walk through the basic items that I'm going to be using in this project, yeah? I normally do that in these videos. So I've got some cheesecloth I just picked up from the dollar store there, real cheap stuff. Just kind of a thin, cloth, if you will. Got some vinegar, just, Walmart white vinegar, nothing fancy there. And then I've got some powdered skim milk. So, pasteurized instant powdered skim milk. I'm going to pick this up wherever. But, this specifically is the fat-free kind, so you can use that. You don't have to be worried about, that kind of thing of does it have fat or not. Either way, I've made cheese out of this stuff in the past and it's been delicious. So needless to say, I also have a pot and a strainer here just to help us do things, and then I've got just a measuring cup that I'll use to kind of, measure out the dole of items. So we'll just get on with making the cheese at this point in time. Okay, so the first order of business, I'm just going to need to get myself 3 cups of water. So... and you can use like a warm water in this regard, kind of room temperature, maybe a little bit warmer, there's no harm in it. So I'm just going to measure out my 3 cups there, nothing to it. And now I'm going to need 1 cup of the powdered milk. So, like I say, this doesn't have to be exact measurement stuff. You can do half cups or, depending on how much cheese you want to make and that kind of thing. It's really the concept of you just want to have 3 times as much water being used as you do milk. But I'll do off a half decent amount of cheese just for the video's example. And then we'll use it at the end of it. Actually make something tasty to eat. Just because we're getting close to lunchtime, might as well, right? So I'll just dump that right into the water. Nothing, nothing fancy here. Grab a few of the missing bits. So I'm just going to shift this over to my stove, and I'm just going to stir it in, yeah? And make sure that all the powdered milk's just kind of mixed in the water. So nothing complex here. Alright, like I say, nothing fancy here. Just want to stir in that milk, make sure that all the powder's mixed in the water. I'm going to turn the heat on to about a medium heat. And I'm going to bring this up to under a boil. I want this to be fairly warm, but I don't want it to come to a boil in that regard. So I'll just shift camera angles and that kind of stuff and warm this up. It's a real simple process. Like I say, you want to get it up to about 80, 90 degrees Celsius. Like I say, close to a boil, but not quite there. So I always like to do the old faithful pinky test of if I can stick my pinky in there and it doesn't hurt. Yeah, well, we're at that point. As soon as it gets to the temperature where it's too hot for my pinky to kind of be in there, that's when I stop. You can do exact measurements with thermometers and that kind of stuff, but I, generally speaking, just do this stuff by feel. It's pretty elementary process, yeah? So, like I say, I'll just give it a minute for this to warm up, and then we'll cut back. Okay, we're starting to get closer. So, just to give you an idea, I just occasionally stir this as I go. I brought my little temperature gun so we can see. So you're starting to see a bit of steam coming off it and stuff. We're getting up to, about 55 Celsius. Hopefully the camera's picking that up all right. I know this temperature gauge is not the best when it comes to the camera getting it, but yeah, so I'm getting close. So 65, about 150 Fahrenheit or so. So I'd even be okay with doing it at this temperature. I don't want to go too much hotter than that. So, but I'm up to about 70 degrees Celsius. I'll just stop it at this point in time. You can go a little bit higher, but I don't really feel the need is there. And I'll do my old faithful pinky test just to make sure, my pinky doesn't want to sit in there for any length of time. And like I say, we're about 65, 70 degrees Celsius. It's not exact science stuff. This stuff's pretty flexible. Just want to get it good and warm, but not quite to a boil, yeah? So now for the next step, I'm just going to turn around, take my spoon here, and I've got my vinegar. I'm just going to pour a little dole in. About that much. Not exact measurement stuff. I know there's people out there tell you use exactly this many tablespoons and this and that. And to me, you can just kind of gauge it by feel, but I've already turned the heat off now. I just want to stir that vinegar in, and it'll start to clump up as the curds are forming and separating from the whey. So I want to let this process actually have a bit of time, and here I'll kind of show it to you if I can. It's already getting this clumpiness to it, yeah? So that's exactly what we want to see. So, like I say, I'm just gonna kind of let this sit now. I'll just put a lid on it. I'm gonna let that sit now for about half an hour or so, just to make sure that the chemical reactions, if you will, of the curd and that kind of thing. So I'll cut back in about half an hour, and we'll see where we're at with the cheese. Alright, well, I've let this sit for, I don't know, about 20 minutes or so. It's not exact science when it comes to this stuff, but you can see that the curds have separated from the whey now. I'm getting quite a clumpy mass, if you will, yeah? So what I'm going to do is just kind of pull that all together, and then I'm just going to drop that. I'll shift my camera angles over. Then I'll just drop that into that cheesecloth that we have there. And like I say, just kind of gently pushing it all into one mass to kind of keep it together as much as I can, yeah? So I'll shift camera angles and we'll switch over to the strainer and that kind of stuff. I just wanted to show you the cheese curds kind of pulling together and doing their thing, yeah? Alright, so I just brought in a little glass bowl to set my strainer onto and hopefully give better visualizations as we go. But yeah, like I say, this isn't a complex process. I'm just going to turn around now and take my pot with the curds in it and kind of push it together the best I can. And I'm just going to dump that into that cheesecloth to make sure I got the better part of it out of there. Yeah, it all seemed to come together pretty smoothly. And it's really just that simple of a process. And you can see now, here, let me just shift this. You can see now, that's the curd left, or sorry, the whey left. You don't want to get rid of this. You can use that in soup stocks or other things. There's lots of nutritional value that exists in this. So, you know, if you're in a apocalypse now survival situation, you know, STHF, that kind of stuff, you want to keep this and use it to make other things with. Yeah, you don't want to waste this. There's lots of good bits in there. But let's go back to the cheese. I'll just set this pot over onto the stove. Just get it out of the way for right now. And now all I'm going to do, make sure I'm on camera okay. So all I'm going to do in this regard is kind of pull in the cheesecloth around the outside edges. And I want to just strain off all of the whey from the curd that I can get off now. And I don't want to do this to an extreme level. I still want to keep some of it into that cheese to keep the cheese moist a bit. So all I'm doing is kind of at the top, I'm just twisting it to give it a bit of extra tension to help drive out that moisture out of the curds. And all the extra whey that's left, which there really isn't a lot in this situation, I'm just going to dump back into the pot now. Now when it comes to the actual cheese curds themselves now, so you can see it's already starting to form like a cheese consistency. It's holding together fairly nicely. So I just want to kind of bunch that together. Don't worry, my hands were washed right beforehand. But I just want to kind of bunch that together and just squeeze it with my hand over the bowl. And you'll start to see it's starting to get a bit of pull and stretchiness to it. It's not too much at this point in time. But I want to kind of keep folding it into itself and pressing it and that kind of stuff. And what you can do if you want to make it more like a mozzarella cheese at this point in time, you can warm it up in a microwave if you had that luxury. You know, in a apocalypse situation, that's not necessarily going to be the case, but you can do that. That is an option. But as you can see, I've kind of gotten down to a cheese ball now. Then you can make this, you know, nice and smooth and everything else as much as you want. I'm not overly concerned about it because I know I'm going to be using this more as just a crumble, if you will. So I'll just sit back in the strainer, let a bit more of the whey come out. I'll add that back into the pot. And that's pretty well it. You could let this sit and cool down now. I'm not going to at first because I want this to have a bit more kind of stringiness and stretchiness to it. So the thinking really is, I'll shift camera angles here. I'll just leave that for a second. I'll shift camera angles here and I'll go back to the pot again, yeah? So now I'm just going to bring this whey back up to temperature again. And I'm going to bring this back up to nearly up to a boil for a second time. And then I'm going to take this ball of cheese now that we've created, and I'm just going to set that down in there. And I'll occasionally roll it around, because just the pot shape that I used, it's not completely covered. But in essence, I'm just going to let that sit right into a super hot liquid of this whey. So like I say, I'll bring the whey back up to temperature that it's really close to a boil, not quite, but close. And then I'll roll my cheese around in it and let it kind of do a process that the heat in the whey will allow the cheese to become a little more stringy and stuff on the inside. Now, rolling it earlier was just to kind of get it into a ball so it was handleable, you know, but at this point in time, like I say, I'll just bring this up to temperature. When we're close to a boil, I'll cut back with the camera, yeah? Okay, so it only took a minute, and like I say, I'm close to a boil now. So I'm just gonna pop that off now, shift this over. I'm just gonna put something in behind it now to kind of make it that you guys can see it a little better. And it all seems to be relatively stable. And now I'm just gonna take that cheese ball that I had, and I'm just gonna let that sit down and into it, and that way I don't have to keep stirring it and that kind of stuff. So I'm gonna let that sit in there for about, I don't know, 3-4 minutes. I'm gonna pull it out, kind of massage it in my hands again, and start to work some of the elasticity into the cheese. So I'll cut back in 2 or 3 minutes once I'm ready to do that step, yeah? Okay, so like I say, it's been about 2 or 3 minutes now, and you can see the ball held together. It's definitely a lot hotter. So what I'll do is I'll shift camera angles and go back over to the other side and kind of work this cheese a little bit more, yeah? So let me just put it back in there for 2 seconds while I shift the camera. And none of this is critical. I could eat this at this point in time, but I just want to have a little bit of extra stretchiness in the cheese once I actually go to eat it. So that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of bringing it back up to temperature again. It helps aid that within the cheese itself. Okay, so I've got my cheese ball now, and like I say, I'll just do that over the bowl to kind of keep the mess to a dull roar. Now this is super hot, but you can see hopefully now I'm starting to get more stretchiness and pliability to it from that increase in temperature. So I'm just simply going to turn around and roll that out in my hand again, trying to drive out a bit of that moisture that's in there still. And I know I kind of added to it by putting it back into the heat, but such is life. That's just part of this process, right? And you can see now I've formed a nice ball of cheese, you know, that's about the size of 2/3 of a cup. So most of that powdered milk that I used to begin with, I've actually reclaimed during this entire process. So at this point in time now, I'm just going to let this sit and cool. So the first order of business I'm going to do, I'll just drain off any of the whey that's still in there. Now I'm just going to take some kind of cool water that exists just out of my tap. Make sure I'm on the camera still here. I'm just going to take some cool water that exists. Now I'm going to drop the temperature of this back down. And that's pretty well it for the process. So I could put this into my fridge, and really I just want to cool this right back down again. I could throw in a couple ice cubes, you know. In an apocalypse situation, you'll be just lucky enough to have water to begin with and fuel to cook this with. But in either scenario, I'll kind of keep it to this type of design to fit more to the apocalypse cheese, if you will. So I'll take it under the premise that we're not going to have ice. I'm just going to let this sit in cold water for another about half hour or so, just for it to firm up and that kind of stuff. Then we'll slice it. I'll pull out some flatbread. We'll cut it up, we'll throw it onto the flatbread, and then I'll throw it in my oven and show you how nicely it melts and that kind of stuff. Now you can eat this either cooked or melted in, you know, in the oven, just like you would on the top of a pizza or any of that business. But yeah, we'll just show you that as we get there, yeah? Okay, so I've given it a bit of time to cool down now and that kind of stuff. And it feels way more firm now. It feels like, you know, normal cheese would feel, if you will. So I'll just dump that out for a second. Just set that bowl to the side. I'll give you a little close-up of this. Now, I could have dressed this up a little nicer than I have, but like I say, this is still going to be just as tasty no matter how you go about it. So if you're worried about presentation, you may take more time kind of making the ball smooth and all that happiness. But I'm just going to kind of pat it off with a bit of paper towel, get the moisture off the outside of it. Now, when this was still you know, in curds, and it was just kind of loose in the pot. And I just started to form this together. At that point in time, I could have added in some salt and, you know, a few herbs or spices to kind of give it a bit of flavor. I didn't bother in this example because I just wanted to keep it super, super simple, right? Just make it all about the cheese. But there you have it. You can see it's kind of got a spongy texture. It's like a conventional cheese. So I'll just bust out my pocket knife here. Make sure I'm still on camera, okay? And I'll just cut off a chunk of this now to show you the insides, if you will, and it's still a bit crumbly just because the temperature and stuff that I set it at, but you can see that I can cut that into, you know, mozzarella style pieces, if you will. Now what I've done here is I've just got this piece of flatbread that I already had just sitting in my freezer, but it's easy enough to make flatbreads and that kind of stuff with shelf-stable materials as well. But I'm just going to cut up some of this cheese now and just lay it onto this flatbread. It's a naan bread, actually, to be more specific, but just going to set that on there. And I'm preheating my oven right now. And I just want to show you kind of how well this melts. And like I said, this stuff is totally good. At this point in time, I can just, here, I'll eat a little bit at the end here. But just to show you that, no, it's tasty and it can be eaten all on its own and that kind of happiness. Like, and because I didn't put any salt or, you know, flavors to it, it's got a very mild taste to it. There's not much flavor to it at this point in time. But it's really was just under the premise of showing you the basic function of making this cheese. And right now, it does. It tastes just like cheese. It's got all the flavor just the same and that kind of stuff. So I'm just going to wait for my oven to preheat here. In fact, I could even put a sprinkle of salt on this. Let's see if I got my... I'll just put a bit of spices on here to add a bit of flavor to it. You know, and obviously if you're in an apocalypse situation, you take whatever you can in that regard. And that'll all just melt into it. So I'm not worried too much in that regard. And I'll give it a bit of salt, just because I like salted everythings. There we go. And like I say, when my oven heats up a bit, I'll turn around and just throw this in the oven, and then I'll show you how well the cheese actually melts, yeah? Okay, like I say, I just kind of threw it in on the oven rack now. And I'll let it sit in there like you would a normal pizza, if you will. 8 to 10 minutes, that kind of stuff. I'll give it the normal time I normally would. And just to get that cheese melted in that. And then I'll cut back and show you the finished product, yeah? Alright, so I'm just going to pull that out of the oven now at this point in time. It's been about 10 minutes or so. Show you the kind of apocalypse deliciousness you can be looking forward to. So, as you can see, the cheese isn't quite as melty as like a mozzarella or something like that. But, let me just pull out a fork. But, it's definitely got some stretch to it and that kind of stuff. You can see it's got a bit of pull to it, yeah? Hopefully the camera's giving that justice. But, like I say, I'll bust out a knife here. Hold on. I think I got a pizza cutter even. Come in the mix. I might already be in the dishwasher, so let me just grab a knife and cut this up into chunks. I'll show you. I mean, let's face it, if we were in an apocalypse, grid down, that kind of scenario, this entire combination can be made with stuff that you got sitting in your pantry that's on your shelf for years and years and years, right? It's one of those things of, let me just take a bite and see what it tastes like. So good. And it really tastes like, because I cut the cheese pretty thick, it really tastes like a cheese bread. And because I put those spices on there and gave it a bit more flavor and that kind of stuff, the cheese itself being so young doesn't have a lot of flavor. So if you don't add salt and flavors into it right off the get-go, then it's got a relatively mild, bland taste to it, if you will. But as it goes, it's hot. Tasty though. But as it goes for kind of off-the-shelf apocalypse cheese, to have this kind of option is fantastic. And to know that this can be sitting on my shelf for the next, as long as you keep the stuff properly. The powdered milk can last like 20 years. Vinegar never expires, that kind of stuff. Salt, any of the spices and stuff. Most of that stuff doesn't tend to go bad, generally speaking, for years and years and years, right? So, salt doesn't go bad or any of that business. So you can have this kind of Apocolypse cheese sitting on your shelf indefinitely. And, if anything goes south, it's easy enough to turn around and make things like this. Even with the flatbreads, a bit of flour, some salt, a bit of sugar, mix it in a bowl, cook it on a flat top pan, that kind of stuff. You can easily create these types of flatbreads yourself, with ease. And when it comes to the whey, generally speaking, the whey's got lots of nutritional value. And like I say, now that I've boiled it off, you can see it kind of change color and turn more milky. But this whey would make a fantastic soup stock if you had wild edible vegetables, say, or plants that were growing in the area, and you wanted to throw yourself together a pot of soup to go along with your Apocolypse cheese flatbread here. That's absolutely doable. You throw in a couple edible plants and that kind of stuff into that whey, cook it off like you would a soup, and all of a sudden you can use a little bit of powdered milk and vinegar as an entire base to build your meal around. I'm just going to take another bite. This is quite tasty. But it's really that simple. If you're in an apocalypse situation, SHTF, that kind of stuff, having stuff like this for creature comforts is invaluable, and like I say, the way you want to use all those resources. So hopefully that's just another tip you can throw in your toolbox. Like I say, I know this is only a short video. I kind of did it as a fun video. I've had people ask me, what do you mean you can make cheese off stuff you got sitting on your shelf? So here it is, people. Apocolypse cheese. But if you enjoy this type of content, like, share, subscribe, and all that kind of stuff. And hopefully we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.